Okay, so this recording is to help out one of our Serpens members who's having a problem with getting properties and accessing properties on his UI. And we need to discuss properties just a little bit. So not all properties are created equally. Some properties are attached to the scene, and some data are attached to a screen. Like this property here, camera, locking the camera to view. This is attached to the screen because, as you can see, BPI data screens it has to live on a specific screen, and other screens aren't compatible. So if I tried to reference this information over on the node editor on a UI, like on a menu here, if I tried to put that inside of here, this isn't a 3D view, and there's no camera in this area. It's only attached to the 3D view screen. Now, equally, there are object properties. So this cube has object properties, this Bezier circle has object properties, and the sun light has object properties. And they're all different. If I bring this over on the side, you can see the object data icon. This changes based upon what I select. And that's because the data tied to these objects is unique. Now this is a mesh object, and mesh objects have things like normals, whereas a Bezier curve doesn't have normals. But if I make 2 cubes, or even 3 cubes, each one of these has its own specific property for auto smooth. Notice how I click between these two, and default cube 1 and default cube both have their own auto smooth, and I could turn this on and set the angle low for this object, and this object doesn't have its properties change. So when you're wanting to make use of something like this in the UI, you need to be thinking about, if I'm copying this, am I copying it from this specific object, or am I wanting to reference the active mesh in my UI? So when I click on it, it will change just like this one does. So we're going to cover that in this video. So this is the Serpens 3 release candidate number 2 that I have installed, and I'm working on Blender 3.1.0. And I just have a panel here, and I'll label it test, and it's got nothing on it. Let's go ahead and start with the view. So camera to view. So I can right click on this property and get the Serpens property. And if it works, it'll copy, and you can use the keyboard shortcut Shift V to paste it, or you can go to the Serpens add menu, and under properties, there's a Blender property. And you can paste the property. It's the same task. Now, notice how we have inputs here. You need to feed data to this property because it's a child of an area and space on the screen. So you have to tell it what area is being used for the 3D view. And if you don't get this right, it's not going to show up on the UI. So and I'll just show you as a test here. If I plug in a display property node, so we go to interface, and we're looking for a display property. When you plug into display property node, it allows you to affect and change a property on the UI. And I want to affect this lock camera. So when I plug this in, you'll notice that nothing shows up. But in my console, I've got an error. Hey, properties not found in the space outliner lock camera. Okay, well, why is that? Well, I'm referencing it on area 0. What if I change this to area 1? What about area 2? What about area 3, 4? Oh, look at that. On area 4, I'm getting that property. But if I were to go to a different workspace, my areas are all different on my layout workspace. So it's going to error out again because this is not area 4. It's area 4 on this workspace, but this is not area 4 here. So what we can do is sometimes you have the opportunity to grab the active area, and you can either do that from the context on your Blend data browser. You come here, and here we have area. And if you scroll down, you can show path, and this gives you the Python to tell you a little bit about what you're copying over. So this is bpy context area. That's the active area. Context is wherever my mouse is. So when I'm on layout here, my mouse is over this area. But I have these areas over here as well. So I want it to show up on the active area where the property is being displayed. So I can do that by grabbing the active area. And then when I click copy, I can do Shift V and paste it in. I can come to property now and do use active area. clear my console. And when I come up over here now, notice how it's available because I'm on my active area. This panel is technically in the 3D view, so it's in the active area for this context. Now, sometimes you don't need to plug in the context properties that are showing here. So in this case, it says areas using active, and it did that just when I changed it to property, but it's not always going to do that. If I change spaces to property, there is no context for an active space. So I'd have to change that back to the index, and it just so happens that space 0 is going to work okay. And I can plug this one in or not. Using the active area is the same thing as what I'm plugging in here, because this is being grabbed from the context, and context is talking about the active area. Okay, so we've got that, and I can give it a label if I want, so lock camera. You can also choose an icon, and the icon's going to affect the checkbox. So if I give a hard icon, if I don't give any label, then the checkbox is the heart. If I do that, it's still technically a full checkbox. Now I could always put a label above it. And we'll turn on my insert socket buttons. So I could put the label up here instead. Okay, and then make this something like that. And if you want them on the same row, you just add in a row node. So there's lots of ways to affect your UI, make them custom. So we'll just quickly put these two together. Something like that, okay? All right, well now I want to add in the auto smooth on my object. So if I grab this property off of this object and I right click, get property, we're going to bring this screen back over just a little bit, and I'm going to turn off my show path to make this easier to read. So I'm going to paste in my property with Shift V. But notice when I paste it, it's coming from default cube. If I do it on this one and I right click and get property and paste it, it's coming from default cube 01. If these objects don't exist on the Blender file, then the UI is going to error out and say, I can't find default cube. I can't find default cube 01. Well, if you change this to property, you can get it from a mesh instead. Or you can get it from the context active objects mesh. So if we open up active object, I can go into this filter, and this is a filter just for anything that's tied to active object. And I can type in mesh, and I should be able to, let's see. Oh, yeah, we're probably looking for a pointer. Animation cycles, data curve. So my context isn't showing me what I want. So in this case, I can right click on anything in my UI in my 3D view. So I'm just going to right click on one of these buttons here and copy context, and I'm going to paste it and reload the context. So now when I open up active object, I have more options. Now I have data mesh. So when I do my filter now, data mesh is the pointer that I want. So I can copy that, Shift V to paste, and this is the mesh data. And so let's do another display property here. When I add this item, there's no property connected. When I add this property, it's not going to show up because we don't have anything assigned to the type yet on my data coming in. And now when I attach my mesh data, it's going to show up. And that's now my use auto smooth. And notice how it updates based on what's shown here on this property, because it's tied to the active data mesh. But this only works when you have an active mesh selected. Technically, when I select something else, it's going to try to access that data still. But this isn't a mesh, so it's going to give you an error. Let me show my console. Property not found. Curve doesn't have a property called use auto smooth. So the right way to do this is you probably need to use an if else in your interface and need to check to see if you have an active object selected first, because that can also cause a problem, and I'll show that. But you also need to check to see if your active object is a mesh. And I think there's a node for that. If you go to Shift A and object is object type, Joshua and Finn have made you an awesome node. And all you have to do is come in here and select the proper object data type. And then you just put an if else in front. And now I'm going to go back to previous, clear my console out, and I can select these all day long. And I'm not going to error out because the UI is not going to try to reference data that doesn't exist on these objects that aren't meshes. It's not going to show up, and that's okay. It's just also not going to error out because the property doesn't exist for these objects. And there's no way to grab that unless you physically say I want to get it from specific object, default cube02. It will show up always for default cube02 if that's the way you want to show it. But currently, you'd have to change that to either reference the object index. Let's just do auto smooth. So notice how it's always showing up now. But I have this if else here, so I could bypass this. And it's always going to show up, but it's only tied to a specific object. It's tied to object mesh 0. So when I change it, whoever is mesh 0 is going to get changed. And let's toggle it. It's probably this guy. Yep. So I can change it here, and it's not going to change anything on this object because I'm looking at mesh 0. But it is changing over here. I don't even have to have this object selected because I'm affecting its data whether it's selected or not. I can toggle it off, come back over here, and it's off. I could toggle it on, come back over here, and it's on. So you don't want to reference this unless you're specifically looking for a specific object. You can either do it off of the index or off of the name. I could come in and enter a name. And when you're copying these, when you have an object selected, it's going to give that name. Right? It's assuming you want that object. So I can plug in default cube now, and it's going to show the default cubes. It'll be the same thing as what I just did with the index. Okay? But I don't want it just for default cube. I want it for any mesh object that I select. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to come to my if else, verify that the object, the active object, is a mesh. And now it's coming back. If it's not a mesh, it won't show up. So what happens when I hide an object? So if I hit H to hide, so it's still showing up, right? Because even though the object is hidden, it was technically active. But now there is no, if I hide all these objects, do I get an error in my console? Yep, because I still have an object that's active. So let's unhide. There's a better way to do this. I'm just going to delete all these objects. So delete. And I probably will get an error in my console now. Oh my goodness, there is no object with attribute type because nobody's active. So to overcome that error, you'd have to go and search for the view layer. And the view layer has an active object. So object, layer objects. And on the object for your view layer, when I'm in context, you can open this up, and there's a specific function. See view layer here. Hold on one second. We're looking for select get, and it's going to be in the object section. Hold on. View layer. Let me reload. Copy my context, reload. Open up view layer, and I'm looking for We have active object. I'm just going to open up one of these objects. So our selected object, there's a function that's going to show up at some point in here, and I can scroll down and look for it. And we'll just do that. We'll keep scrolling. There should be a select get. Select get. And even though I had to select an object, I can change that. So it's coming off of area light. It still exists in my scene, but I can because this is it's like a property function. I can turn off the execute, and I don't want to look at a named object. I want to look at a property object, and it's going to use the active object. So is there an active object? Well, if there isn't, we're going to move this over just a little bit. I'm probably still going to error out on my panel. Let's open my console here. Yep, so it's trying to access an active object, so that's not the one I want. What if I just do, sometimes you're going to want select get, and sometimes you don't. Let's just get our object. So there's an objects node, and we can plug this active object directly into the if statement, and that's basically saying if there is an active object. So now if I clear my console, and we're bringing it off to the side here. So I'm highlighting my mouse in this context area, and we're seeing if that property is going to get through this if statement. And the errors are gone. So I can add in a cube, delete my cube, and I had that property, as you can see, shows auto smooth, and when I toggle it, it's going to be toggling over here. Oh, wait. We need to change this to property and give it our active mesh data. There we go. Now it's toggling. So when I add another one, that one will toggle off, this one's still on. When I delete these objects, the UI will disappear because technically there's no mesh in the scene, but I should also not have an error. Let me clear my console. So add in a cube, add in another cube. Delete. And do I have an error anymore? Let's find out. No more errors. So it takes a couple more nodes to get this set up properly. Like, are we a mesh? And we want to grab the mesh, the active mesh information on the use auto smooth. Okay. But sometimes you'll have, when you change it to property, it'll automatically default to using active. If it doesn't, you need to feed it the data. And this is just going to be part of learning. Now, in the Blender data browser, we've been using context the whole time. You technically can access data, and this is current data that lives in the scene. So any object that lives in the scene, when I add a cube in here, we're going to call this cube, and I add another one, cube 1, cube 2, cube 3. When I reload, on my data browser, I can go to objects, and look at that. They're all here. The more I add, the more they're going to show up when I reload. Okay? And this is for grabbing properties off of a specific object. So you're going to notice that the properties are still here. Like, I can come down, and there's going to be a Boolean for this mesh object that's going to say auto smooth. Use, let's see here. Oh, I don't want line art. Let's see, data mesh. I need it on the mesh data. And this is where I can use a filter. So I can type in auto here. And look at that. Anything with the AU is going to be able to be filtered down and use auto smooth. So I want auto smooth angle this time. And notice how when I paste it in after I copied it, pasting with Shift V, it's coming from cube.001 because I came down through cube.001 on the data tab. So data is different than context. Context is like what's active currently. Where's the mouse at? What's the object being selected? What screen am I in? Data is like what exists in my blend file and what specific object do I want to reference properties from. But if I don't want it off of a specific object, I have the option to come over here and change to pick something else or even change the name. I could change it to cube002. As long as it exists in my scene, I should be able to grab properties off of it. So if I change this to property, I'm using active for this one. So I can bring my display property down, and I want these if statements for this as well. So if I want to do more than a few things off of an if statement, I can put a row in or a column. And now I can do two things off of the true from the if statement. Plug that property in, and now I have an auto smooth angle. Okay? And as I adjust that, it's coming and adjusting it off of the active object. This one's got 30 degrees, this one's got 51 degrees. So hopefully that makes sense. I know this video is getting a little bit longer, but this is just a quick intro to adding properties to Serpens 3 and referencing them. Hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully that makes sense. Now before I end, we're going to export this add-on just to show that it works. So I'm going to save my add-on, go to my downloads, I'm saving it as test 1.1.0, export my add-on. And if you did it right and you don't have anything else causing errors on Serpens, then you should get a zip file. And as you can see here, I have a zip file. If it doesn't zip, it's because something in your Serpens graph or in your code is wrong, and it's going to cause an error on export. Okay. Now, there may be a couple Serpens bugs that are also causing this. I think there's a bug currently with images where you have to assign fake users. They're working on getting through that hump for the official release. But I'm done with this, so I'm going to save this file. I'm just going to save it to my downloads, and then I'm going to open up a new file. Go to my edit preferences, add-ons, install. Go to my test. So now I've got this installed. I have a test panel. And look at that. It all installs. And when I click on and off, this object is still active. So that's where select get would be good. If it wasn't selected, you can make it hide. But I'm also not generating errors in my console. Right? There are no errors. Because I did that if statement saying if my object was active in the first place, there is no active object, so we're not even going to try to produce properties. When I add in a mesh object, cube, another cube, another cube, we can add in a Suzanne if we want. As long as it's a mesh and it has a property use auto smooth, it's going to try to reference that data. So I can turn on auto smooth for Suzanne. I can turn on, you have to make sure that you shade smooth as well. Okay, turn on shade smooth, use auto smooth. So it's only affecting the individual active objects if they're meshes. Now if I want to lock my camera to view, I've got that accessible as well. And it doesn't matter what workspace I'm in. I'm in edit preferences workspace right now. I can go to layout, and lock camera to view is a property on this screen now. And notice how it's not active. Well, because this is a different screen than this screen. Okay. And I've got different view settings saved, right? This screen has a completely different view than this screen. Well, except for I'm affecting the actual camera. So if I left my camera view and I moved over here and I looked at the underside of this cube, I come back over to this workspace, and the view properties are different. They're associated with the screen. So Blender has lots of properties. You just have to know what is the property a child of, because it'll be different for every parent, right? Every workspace has its own properties. Every object has its own properties. The more you wrap your head around that, the easier it will be to code your add-ons. Okay, that's all I have. And hopefully this was educational, and we'll catch you on the next one.